This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbron, and here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. Emmanuel Macron in talks with host Sanae Takaichi as Japan and France lock in deals on critical minerals to cut reliance on China. South Korea and Indonesia deepen defense, trade and energy cooperation. Presidents Lee Jae-myung and Prabowo Subianto affirming trust and natural partnerships. A new timeline for an end to the war on Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump saying the conflict could be over in 2 to 3 weeks. Asian equities rebound on those words, while oil prices slide as hopes rise for an end to the war. Also tonight, for individuals aiming for the moon quite literally, we're about 12 hours away from NASA's first crewed lunar mission in more than 50 years. And that's heating up the space race that has China planning a similar mission by 2030. French President Emmanuel Macron is in Tokyo as part of a 3-day visit. He met with Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, where the two leaders discussed various issues, including that conflict in the Middle East. Now, they held a bilateral meeting with reports of an agreement on rare earths supply chains to reduce dependence on China's dominance of that sector. Both have also reportedly agreed to secure raw materials supplied for a rare earths refining project in southern France. Well, let's cross live to that press conference and have a listen.
C'est aussi le lien entre deux peuples, deux cultures. C'est pourquoi le Japon, pays d'honneur de l'édition 2026 du Festival de Cannes, sera également à l'honneur du Salon du Livre de Paris en 2028, l'année de célébration de nos relations diplomatiques. Et nous souhaitons...
You're listening there to Mr. Macron and he, together with Ms. Takaichi, at their joint press conference in Tokyo. Well, earlier, the Japanese and French foreign and defense ministers held 2+2 meetings on the sidelines with agreements signed to deepen defense cooperation with an eye on the conflict in the Middle East as well as the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz.
言うまでもなく、今や欧州、大西洋とインド太平洋の安全保障は一体不可分です。力による一方的な現状変更を防ぐために、インド太平洋国家でもあり、特別なパートナーであるフランスとの連帯は極めて重要です。
Il y a donc un sentiment d'urgence à développer ensemble une relation véritablement stratégique allant au-delà des traditionnels liens économiques et culturels. Dans un monde où les rivalités systémiques s'intensifient, que la France et le Japon fassent équipe est un impératif stratégique pour éviter de devenir des variables d'ajustement des politiques des autres puissances.
The South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has welcomed his Indonesian counterpart Prabowo Subianto to Seoul. The two leaders held talks discussing energy security and agreeing to expand cooperation in key sectors like critical minerals and technology. Their summit saw both nations upgrading ties to a strategic partnership and the signing of 16 preliminary agreements. Mr. Prabowo described the two countries as natural partners with complementary roles, while Mr. Lee hailed Indonesia as a trustworthy friend. CNA's senior correspondent Im Young-suk joins us live from Seoul. Young-suk, tell us first about the significance of these deals that Mr. Lee struck with Mr. Prabowo in South Korea, for South Korea.
Well, they are quite significant, not because there were 16 deals that were signed, but it's really about this big picture, the strategic directions of how the two countries want their relationship to move forward. Now, for South Korea, it is trying to lock in Indonesia as a long-term partner because, for example, in terms of resources, Indonesia is very rich in things like nickel, which are essential for batteries and electric vehicles. And South Korea, being a major battery and tech manufacturer, it needs the stable access to those resources. So the deal helps South Korea secure a long-term supply chain, which is, top priority for South Korea right now. And also this business and investment. Korean companies are already in Indonesia. And so the deals open the door for more, especially in areas like EVs, the infrastructure and technology. And also, future industries. It seems that the two leaders discussed, and they were discussing cooperation on AI, digital systems, and clean energy. And so, they were looking also into the future cooperation. So it seems like the two countries are looking to build this long-term economic and strategic partnership.
So on the military front or defense front, they're advancing and elevating those ties as well. But has it been formalized in a deal?
No, it hasn't. I mean, defense was definitely discussed between the two sides. But right now, we're not hearing of any new deals being signed. And reports did say that, they did discuss defense projects, especially the one that they're working on now, this KF-21 fighter jet project named Porame project. Now, this is essentially South Korea's first homegrown fighter jet, and it was developed with support from Indonesia. But the project hasn't been smooth. There have been these ups and downs. At this stage, it's really uncertain exactly what's happening to Indonesia's role, as Indonesia apparently had trouble paying its share. And so its role has been reduced, but it remains uncertain whether Indonesia is going to stay closely involved in this project or instead remain a smaller partner on the sidelines. And also if Indonesia will be buying these fighter jets as earlier planned, because the original plan was to procure 48 fighter jets, though it seems that number has also been reduced to 16. Now, President Lee Jae-myung earlier did say in an interview with the Indonesian media that South Korea was planning to sign a deal to export those 16 units during this summit meeting. And he even described this project as a model example of global defense cooperation. But we haven't heard anything about that signing too. And now we have local reports here saying that the signing did not take place as earlier planned during the summit meeting. And so it's, everything seems to be up in the air, and we're not sure exactly why. But, overall, but I don't think that's affected the overall mood when the two leaders met, because they were holding a summit meeting here and also a state luncheon that was attended by business leaders here in South Korea.
CNA's senior correspondent Lim Young-suk in Seoul. Thank you very much. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will be leaving the war on Iran within the next 2 to 3 weeks. He adds that Tehran does not have to strike a deal for the conflict to end, and that the fighting could conclude even if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Now, his comments come ahead of an expected nationwide address on the war. That's late Wednesday U.S. time, or 9 a.m. tomorrow, Singapore, Hong Kong time.
We'll be leaving very soon, and if France or some other country wants to get oil or gas, they'll go up through the Strait and the Hormuz Strait. They'll go right up there and they'll be able to fend for themselves. I think it'll be very safe, actually, but we have nothing to do with that. What happens in the Strait, we're not going to have anything to do with, because these countries, China will go up and they'll fuel up their beautiful ships and they'll leave and they'll take care of themselves. There's no reason for us to do it.
Well, those latest statements on the war come as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the next few days will be decisive. He also warned that the conflict would intensify if Tehran does not make a deal.
The latest intel is clear out of CENTCOM. Our strikes are damaging the morale of the Iranian military, leading to widespread desertions, key personnel shortages, and causing frustrations amongst senior leaders.
Now, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told Al Jazeera that there's been direct contact with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, but says it does not amount to negotiations. Both warring parties have been exchanging messages through Pakistan ahead of a Monday deadline for Tehran to end the war or face strikes on its energy infrastructure. Iran says it is willing to end the war, but at a phone call with the president of the European Council, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says his country wants security guarantees to ensure the conflict is never repeated. Well, let's go to our CNA senior correspondent, Tan Yu-Guan. He is joining us live from Shanghai. Yu-Guan, you heard Mr. Trump's comments saying that the war will end in a matter of weeks. Does that give fresh momentum to the peace plan proposed by China and Pakistan?
Well, it does give the plan better timing, doesn't it? Because if Donald Trump is now saying that this war could end in weeks, then the conversation is no longer only about escalation, it is also about exit. And that is exactly where the China-Pakistan proposal is aimed at. Their 5-point plan calls for an immediate end to hostilities, the start of peace talks as soon as possible, protection of civilians and non-military targets, protection for shipping lanes, especially through the Straits of Hormuz, and a bigger role for the UN Charter and international law. So yes, Trump's language makes the proposal sound more relevant. Besides, we can tell that this initiative isn't a one-day effort by Pakistan. Before Pakistan's top envoy arrived in Beijing, the country had already hosted ministers from Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Turkey in Islamabad and said it was ready to host US-Iran talks. So China's inclusion appears to be the next step to give weight to what Pakistan was already trying to build. But it does not mean the plan suddenly has real traction, really, because at this point, Trump's remark is still a signal, not a settlement. So a better read could be this. It gives China-Pakistan plan fresh relevance, but not necessarily fresh leverage, because unless the US, Iran and Israel actually move towards talks, it's still a framework on paper. Jill?
I understand. Depending on whether the plan gains relevance, as you mentioned, how is Beijing positioning itself as far as the proposal to end the war goes?
Well, Beijing is trying to position itself as a responsible power, calling for restraint. The 5-point proposal is built to send exactly that message. Stop the fighting, start talking, protect civilians, protect infrastructure, keep shipping moving, and put the UN back at the center. But Beijing is also being careful. It is backing Pakistan's mediation effort very publicly without putting itself fully at the center of the process. That gives China influence without overcommitting itself. And then there's the practical side. China is clearly worried about the Straits of Hormuz, not just as a security issue, but also as an economic one. And the pain goes beyond just higher transport and energy costs. If you recall, a few days ago, I was talking about a furniture maker in Jiaxing who told me that suppliers are already warning of price hikes for foam, fibers, and polyester fabrics used in sofas. In some cases, around 30% hike. And that's, of course, because polyester and most furniture foam are petrochemical products. They are tied directly to oil and gas supply chain. And at the same time, Beijing is trying to cushion some of the international oil price shock. It kept petrol price increases at about half of what the international market might dictate. This is something that would cost state oil companies and ultimately state coffers. Well, now, we often underestimate how focused China is at keeping its own economy growing and the huge task of keeping its massive population gainfully employed. So this conflict is not in Beijing's interests. Therefore, diplomatically, it wants to look calm, constructive, and pro-peace. Strategically, it wants stability, open sea lanes, and limited fallout for its own interests. Jill?
That perspective from China, CNA senior correspondent Tan Yu-Guan, many thanks. Coming up on East Asia tonight, global corporate deal-making surged in the first quarter of this year, helped by looser antitrust regulations in the US. And countries concerned with energy security in the wake of oil shocks find themselves struggling to cut emissions. We take a closer look at how complicated that transition has become.
We often hear this phrase about UOB, that the bank is putting the customer at the center.
We realize SMEs don't just need capital, they need clarity on what to do. We worked with Enterprise Singapore to launch the SAGE program, which gives SMEs access to sustainability-linked loans, but with simplified requirements. It's about making sustainable finance more accessible without overwhelming the business with unnecessary complications.
This week on Singapore Hour.
My name is Jong-woo. I have been living in Singapore for 20 years. And this is my wife, Kiri. She was born here, so she's Korean Singaporean.
Last year, the Jeju International Choir Festival invited the Voices of Singapore Youth Choir. They were intrigued that our choir was so multi-ethnic.
All this and more on Singapore Hour, Friday on CNA.
Asia experiences some of the world's most powerful typhoons almost every year.
Shall I make a run with the camera? Yeah. Each typhoon presents itself as this set of problems which need to be overcome. My job is to figure out this complex puzzle.
This is getting really, really dangerous.
Scientists and storm chasers put their lives on the line to predict these storms.
Size ng ice, ilang kilometer? Makilagay ngayong latest, yung mas malinaw na forecast track.
And protect the public before it's too late.
那么接下来将会进入到台风防御的关键期。
Worst case scenario is super typhoon category.
The Typhoon Detectives, Decoding the Next Big Typhoon. Premiering April 4, Saturday on CNA.
Welcome to Adventure Begins, a magical bay celebration with Disney Cruise Line, marking a new chapter as the Disney Adventure arrives in Singapore. Join us as stories from Disney, Pixar, and Marvel ignite the skies. See you on board the Disney Adventure.
Welcome back, everyone, and you're just in time for our Roland Lim with the business update. And so nice to talk about an uplift in the Asian markets this midweek. What's driving that?
Well, investors are actually optimistic on the view that the U.S. President Trump's remarks that the Iran war could end soon. The Kospi leading the way in South Korea, the South Korean index soaring more than 8%. While the won weakened against the greenback. Equity traders also taking their cue from data showing that the exports rose at its strongest pace in nearly 4 decades in March, despite the Iran war. Shipments rose 48% on year, boosted by strong global demand for chips. And this beats estimates and is a strong increase from the previous month's gains. The country has chalked up a record trade surplus of about $26 billion. Gains also in Tokyo, both the tech-focused Nikkei as well as the broader topics ending the day around 5% higher, and the yen registering slight gains against the greenback. Adding to that upbeat session, the widely watched Tankan survey by the Bank of Japan, showing business sentiment staying resilient in the face of geopolitical uncertainty. Now, its index of confidence among large manufacturers rising 1 point to 17 points in the January to March quarter. Sentiment among large non-manufacturers was steady, while that of medium-sized manufacturers and non-manufacturers rose. Analysts say the positive results builds the case for the Bank of Japan to raise interest rates as early as this month. But that could be complicated by the war on Iran, which has sent fuel prices soaring, threatening to eat into companies' bottom lines. Greater China markets also well in the green by the close. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index up by more than 2%, led by a rally in tech stocks, particularly chip makers, while on the mainland, major benchmarks also gaining more than 1%. And sentiment helped by continued expansion in China's factory activity for March, according to a private sector survey driven by robust demand that supported manufacturers' confidence. The Rating Dog survey showed that manufacturing PMI came in at 50.8, though this is weaker from 52.1 in February, before the US and Israeli attack on Iran. While Brent has dipped, the prices of Middle Eastern blends continue to remain above the $100 mark. Sonia Varma from Nomura explains what this means for Asian economies.
The cost of imported oil for many Asian countries is actually significantly higher than what we are looking at, which is the Brent oil price. Most countries actually import from the Middle East, so the benchmark for them has been more the Dubai and Oman grade. And if you look at products, so particularly diesel, ATF, the constraints there are actually a lot more severe. So actually the impact for countries, therefore, is a lot more than just focusing purely on, let's say the Brent oil prices. And roughly speaking, every 10% increase in crude oil price adds between 30 to 40 basis point in terms of headline inflation. So we've seen, more than a 50% increase in price levels from the lows. So for many countries, actually, the impact on inflation would be over 1 percentage points. Now, there's a nuance here which becomes important. Number one, what is the duration of this shock? If this is indeed a 2-3 month shock, then it's still a severe impact, but it can be managed in terms of the negative impact on growth and inflation. But if it is a longer lasting shock, then it's not just the terms of trade impact and the supply impact, but countries will also need to reckon with the second order effects in terms of financial conditions tightening, more pressure on the currency, impact on consumer confidence, and potentially even on jobs over a period of time. So I think we are in the zone of uncertainty.
Corporate deal making has had its best quarter ever, despite the ongoing war on Iran, which has rattled global markets, sending stocks and commodities on a roller coaster ride. Now, as of this week, there are 22 transactions worth more than $10 billion announced worldwide, according to the London Stock Exchange Group. Just this week, 2 deals were combined or announced with the combined total of around $90 billion. Yesterday, British conglomerate Unilever said that it sold its food business to rival McCormick in an almost $45 billion deal. Investors, however, reacted badly to that merger, with shares of Unilever dropping by as much as 10%, while McCormick also ending the day's trade more than 7% lower. The surge in deal-making comes amid looser antitrust regulations under the Trump administration. Now, observers say companies are seizing the opportunity to go ahead with mega deals due to lax enforcement compared to the previous Biden administration. The U.S.'s top antitrust official resigned back in February after clashing with senior officials who favored lenient oversight of mergers. Some analysts, however, say the war on Iran is starting to take its toll on deal-making as the pace of moving ahead has slowed due to the uncertainty, particularly in the oil and gas industry, where energy prices have whipsawed. And that'll do it for business.
All right, much appreciated. Thanks for that, Roland. Coming up in East Asia tonight, a new timeline for the end of the war in Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump also saying oil-dependent countries have to start fending for themselves. And Washington also re-examining its NATO membership after failing to get military support for the conflict in the Middle East.
The weather brought to you by Nippon Paint.
Washable, anti-mold, durable, strong coverage. Nippon Paint Odorless, Singapore's most popular paint brand.
The world is our university. Asia is our home. Here in the heart of the city, Singapore Management University was built to connect learning with life. A place that shapes graduates who think critically, act decisively, and lead with purpose. Where ideas don't just stay in classrooms, they move into communities, into action. Our research has advanced industries, influenced policies, and created solutions for society. Our partnerships have built bridges across Asia and the world, from Singapore to the region, from classroom to community, from city to city, from insight to impact. This is where bold ideas are born. And as we look to the future, one thing is certain. What begins here changes lives. What we do here changes the world. Singapore Management University. Bold ideas, big impact.
Biodiversity is booming, which is inviting for some local foragers and farmers who embrace edible wildlife.
We're the largest organic banana grower in Singapore.
This is a gem.
Amazing. Yeah. So the mulberries are from the garden.
No, that's delicious.
Singapore is ramping up conservation efforts locally and across the region.
I really do love reptiles and finding out about them, so I really love my job.
Building must relate to the lives of the people.
目前还是一直要创新一些新的东西。我也不希望是人家把我看作是80岁的人。
There are those who dare to be different, who have made their mark in Singapore and beyond.
You have such big dreams, you want to change the world with your art.
Obviously, every fighter wants to win, so all you can do is to prepare yourself to win.
This is East Asia Tonight. Following these headlines for you, a new timeline for an end to the war on Iran. US President Donald Trump saying the conflict could be over in 2 to 3 weeks. South Korea and Indonesia deepen defense, trade and energy cooperation. Presidents Lee Jae-myung and Prabowo Subianto affirming trust and natural partnerships. Emmanuel Macron in talks with host Sanai Takaichi as Japan and France lock in deals on critical minerals to cut reliance on China. Well, we cut to that press conference a little early in the program. Now we want to go live to Tokyo, where our correspondent Michio Ishida standing by. Michio, what key issues did those leaders discuss?
Well, Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi told President Macron in the beginning of the meeting the situation in Iran, the Middle East, are of critical importance to both countries. She mentioned that it's vital to secure safety of navigation through the Straits of Hormuz for a stable passing of goods, and it's important to settle the situation there. And Mr. Macron agreed. Japan procures 95% of its crude oil from the Middle East, and 90% goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And it's important for Japan to lower its dependence on fossil fuel. Now, with France, Japan aims to work together on a nuclear power cooperation, and they signed a document. This includes on fast reactors, nuclear fuel reprocessing plant, and for a stable supply of rare minerals. The two countries also signed a document. It's on the back of China limiting its exports of rare minerals. Now, they have also signed an agreement on health and sanitation. The two countries will celebrate 170 years of diplomatic ties in 2028. And Mr. Macron promised Ms. Sanai Takaichi that this will be the biggest festivity ever for the two countries.
Now, Mr. Trump, we heard in earlier comments, had called out France for one of the things not being helpful in the war in Iran. Did that topic in particular, or the conflict, come up in their bilats or in the press con?
Well, actually not openly, but Japanese political watchers have been worried whether Mr. Macron can unite the G7 as the chair. And it does obviously include the United States, and Mr. Trump is part of it. Mr. Macron refused outright to take part in the U.S. operation in the Strait of Hormuz, an attack started by the United States. Meanwhile, Ms. Takaichi was seen in Japan as confirming good ties with Mr. Trump, and she said that she told him directly that there is something Japan can do but cannot do as well. Now, she didn't face outright criticism from Mr. Trump. There are views in Japan that need to build a good relationship with countries other than the United States. And with France, Japan has upgraded its relationship, its strategic partnership, this time in critical areas. Also, Japan and France held their 8th a 2+2 meeting of defense and foreign ministers, and they agreed to create a roadmap to strengthen the security cooperation and conduct more joint drills. Now, on Thursday, the two leaders will meet again, and Ms. Takaichi said that she will accompany Mr. Macron to see Japan's advanced space debris technology program. Separately, Mr. Macron will have an audience with Emperor Naruhito.
Well, you're hearing there our senior correspondent, Michio Ishida, reporting from Tokyo. Thank you. President Donald Trump has slammed Europe, as we mentioned, for not helping with the U.S. war effort against Iran. He reportedly told the UK Daily Telegraph that he is strongly considering pulling out of NATO, describing the alliance as, quote, paper tiger. Mr. Trump also calling out European nations, including the UK, for not allowing U.S. warplanes bound for Iran to refuel. The American leader suggested these countries either buy U.S. oil or, quote, just take it from the Strait of Hormuz. He warns that these nations will have to learn to fight for themselves, as the U.S. will not be there to help them anymore. President Trump taking aim at France in particular, accusing Paris of denying U.S. planes permission to fly over French airspace on the way to Israel, and calling France very unhelpful. President Emmanuel Macron has expressed surprise over the criticism, stressing France's position on the U.S. military overflights had not changed. American allies, including NATO, have been hesitant to get involved in the war. Some NATO members have restricted U.S. forces access to their bases and airspace, citing legal concerns. Well, the transition story towards cleaner energy has become a lot more complicated these past few years, from the war in Ukraine to turmoil in the Middle East. Cutting emissions is one challenge, doing it while keeping energy secure, affordable and politically acceptable quite another. Roland Lim prepared this explainer for us.
Now, here's a timeline after the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, as economies reopened, energy demand came back roaring, often outpacing supply. The result was higher prices, tighter markets, and an early reminder that even before the war returned to Europe, the energy system was under strain. Then came Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, that changed the conversation almost overnight. Energy security, once seen by some as an old-fashioned concern, was suddenly back at the center of politics. Now, Europe scrambled to replace Russian gas. Governments raced to secure liquefied natural gas, to shield households from soaring bills, and to keep industry running. And that's where the contradictions became harder to ignore. Now, in some countries, coal stayed online longer than expected or returned to the mix as a temporary backstop. At the same time, renewables kept expanding. It accounted for the biggest contribution to global energy supply in 2024. And here we are today. The Middle East crisis, the immediate priority became energy security.
During COVID, we had a demand shock. The world shut down, and this impacted oil demand. Now it's the opposite. We have a supply shock because of the war. And I think, again, this is going to drive the message home, and I hope it does. And I hope politicians don't have a short memory about it and actually do something to safeguard, one, the passage of energy flows, two, investing more in upstream, creating contingency plans.
The world still runs overwhelmingly on fossil fuels. Now, one 2024 estimate puts fossil fuels at about 86% of the global energy mix, while renewables account for around 8%. But electricity generation within the renewable slice is much further ahead. Now, renewables today generate about a third of global electricity power. And that doesn't mean that the clean energy transition has stalled. In fact, many of the same shocks that lifted fossil fuel prices have also strengthened the case for renewables, electrification and storage. The International Energy Agency expects renewables to meet more than 90% of global electricity demand growth between 2025 and 2030. So while crises have slowed or distorted the transition in places, they've also made one thing clearer. Now, countries that can generate more of their own energy may be better protected from global shocks.
And it will only strengthen our resolve to decouple from fossil fuels, just to diversify. We're not suggesting that we should completely decouple, but diversifying so we can avoid these types of crises, that's the best way forward. And the best way to do that is to use clean fuels, which are already cheaper to produce than fossil fuels. So it's an easy decision to make.
If there's one lesson from the past 5 years, it's this. The energy transition is not moving in a straight line. Now, every time the system is hit by a crisis, governments are forced back to the same balancing act: security, affordability, and sustainability. Except that today, security and affordability are at the forefront.
A comeback. Join us again tomorrow, because in part 2, Roland will explore how energy is no longer just about keeping the lights on or cutting emissions. It's about who produces it and who controls the supply chains that power the world. Now, the US president has signaled an end to the war on Iran multiple times since the conflict began. Julie Yu looks at the key moments and how the timeline has shifted.
The U.S. and Israel launched strikes on Iran on the 28th of February. And on 2nd March, U.S. President Donald Trump said the military campaign would last 4 to 5 weeks in his first public address after the war started. That would have put the possible end date to be around early April. He suggested that the campaign was progressing, quote, substantially ahead of schedule. A week later, on the 9th of March, Mr. Trump claimed victory for the first time, saying the U.S. had won the war. He said Iran was all gone, but added that strikes will continue to, quote, finish the job. In the days that followed, the American president repeated his rhetoric that the end of war was near. He said the U.S. had an upper hand. Iran rebuffed those claims, saying it will determine how and when the war ends. Which brings us to now, Mr. Trump's latest remark suggesting that the U.S. could leave within 2 to 3 weeks. While Washington maintains it is making progress, the timeline for ending the war has remained fluid.
Well, earlier, another of my colleagues, Grace Shin, spoke to Greg Barton, Professor of Global Islamic Politics at Deakin University, and they discussed the possible moves the U.S. may make against Iran, including the feasibility of a ground invasion to seize Tehran's key oil hub, Karg Island.
Where there are no good military options, there are no clear military options to open up the Strait of Hormuz. If you landed troops on the islands that Iran currently controls, or on the southern shore of Iran, it would very, very much like Gallipoli. The Anzacs landing on Gallipoli Cove. It would be a dreadful situation for the troops landing. They would come under fire. They may be able to hold an island, hold part of the shore, but at great cost. Karg Island, which is the top of the Persian Gulf, is the deep water port where Iran ships out most of its oil. Yeah, America could land on this sort of essentially coral atoll, this flat island. They could hold it but at great cost. And of course, to do that in the first place, they have to get there. And so if you're talking about Marines coming by ship, they've got to get through the Strait of Hormuz first of all. Maybe they can come from the west by air, but there's no good options. People are floating either the islands closer to the straits or the shore of Iran or Kharg Island as areas where the US could do things. It could, but in the US and its coalition put 500,000 troops, boots on the ground into Iraq. It's 1/4 the size of Iran. We know how that movie ended. It didn't go well. Afghanistan is very much smaller than Iran, and 20 years we have a Taliban regime in Kabul. There are no good military options for going on the ground, whether it's on the islands or on the southern shore of Iran. So anything that can avoid that happening will be an escape from disaster. And if we start seeing an escalation where desalination plants are struck in a part of the world where most people depend upon desalinated water just to stay alive, then we could have a really hellish situation developing very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And President Trump said even if the conflict ends, the strait may remain disrupted and that allies, including South Korea or other big Asian economies, should find ways to stabilize energy prices. But how effective could it be to normalize energy insecurity, and how important is that? Is this a realistic solution at this point? Could we reach that goal?
Well, it's not realistic to not have the Strait of Hormuz traffic going back to what it was before. But to get back to that normal we had back in February, not so long ago, will take negotiations. It seems that those negotiations may be beyond what America can do by itself in negotiations with Iran. If other nations step in, if there's a face-saving exit, but not just face-saving, an actual sort of situation that the regime in Tehran feels that they're getting something out of this. There needs to be sort of a winning on all sides, but it's possible. Tehran is built for resilience. It can stand a long war, but it would be at great cost. Much better that it has sanctions listed that gets back to getting back on a trajectory of engaging more normally. It will take time before we have a normal regime, but we're not going to force regime change by military force. So this ending of this current dilemma is the best way out. China, as I mentioned, can play a role in the background there. It's Asian nations that depend most on oil flows, whether it's from Iran or from other states in the Persian Gulf. And we need to get some sort of solution that opens up the Strait of Hormuz, not for sort of policed transit where you have to pay a fee to the regime in Tehran. We need something that's much more normal and much more stable.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, the war on Iran not just causing a global energy crunch, it's also disrupting critical food aid deliveries for the vulnerable worldwide.
This is for those who move. Those who don't wait for things to happen, they make them happen. They don't follow maps, they draw them and build what isn't there. They don't call it instinct, they call it Tuesday.
At Standard Chartered, we're here for those who never stand still, who want trusted expertise in the world's most dynamic markets.
Now is your time.
Chapter as the Disney adventure arrives in Singapore. Join us as stories from Disney, Pixar, and Marvel ignite the sky.
You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me.
See the light of the sky, it's a sea, it calls me. And no one knows how far it goes. Let it go. I am one with the wind and sky.
Under the sea. Under the sea. Darling, it's better down where it's wetter. Take it from me.
They say we are what we are, but we don't have to be. I'm bad behavior, but I'll do it in the best way.
We hope you've enjoyed the show. See you on board the Disney Adventure.
Welcome back. The United Nations has warned that the war in the Middle East is disrupting the delivery of food aid around the world and impacting vulnerable communities. The World Food Programme, or WFP, says around 70,000 metric tons of aid are affected, with some supplies stuck in ports. And that is estimated to be enough to feed more than 800,000 people for 3 months. The agency says that it does not ship food through the Strait of Hormuz, but disruptions are driving up fuel costs, affecting shipping routes worldwide and delaying vessels. The WFP warns the impact is unlikely to be short-lived. Several countries in the Middle East, including Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories, depend on food aid. The WFP also sends parcels to Afghanistan, where 17 million people are food insecure. Until recently, those shipments were passing through Iran. They will now need to be trucked through multiple countries, adding weeks of delay and costs. The Asia-Pacific Regional Director of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies tells us about the disruptions to that aid and how some of the world's most vulnerable communities are affected.
We can expect to see pockets of hunger and malnutrition across the region, because those families who were already vulnerable and just about coping will suffer most from the increase in food prices and fuel prices. And just one example, tuk-tuk drivers, for example, the cost of the buying fuel is so high, it'll be a loss-making business. They probably were saving very little anyway, just about scraping enough to survive each day. People like that could be extremely vulnerable. But the parts of the region that hunger could tip over to famine, the parts of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies are most concerned about, they would be primarily Afghanistan, because anyway, food insecurity is extreme. Anyway, over 5 million people have crossed the border from Pakistan and Iran over the last 2 years, exacerbating vulnerability in the country. The supply chains are particularly disrupted there. Cox's Bazar would be another, the largest refugee camp in the world. People are not allowed to work, therefore they are totally dependent on aid. If that aid is cut or even reduced, it can have a significant impact on malnutrition and hunger. So those will be the places that we will concentrate the majority of our attention on. But it is a much bigger problem than that for vulnerable people all around the Asia-Pacific region.
NASA is preparing to launch its first crewed moon mission in more than 50 years, following weeks of delay. Artemis 2 will lift off from Kennedy Space Center tomorrow morning, Singapore time, marking a key step in the new era of space exploration. Tony Waterman filed this report for CNA from Washington, D.C.
10, 9, 8, ignition sequence start, engines armed. 5.
The last time humans set foot on the moon, it was December of 1972.
Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff.
Flag is a beautiful picture.
Apollo 17 was the last of 6 successful U.S. moon landings, which started in 1969.
The Eagle has landed.
At the height of the Cold War space race between the United States and the former USSR.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This is the Apollo 11 command module. So
This is the original.
This is the original from that first lunar landing mission in 1969.
Teasel Muir Harmony is the curator of the Apollo collection at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington. She says the Artemis program draws on the technology developed during the Apollo era, like this heat shield, which protects the astronauts as they re-enter Earth's atmosphere when temperatures can spike up to 2,700 degrees Celsius.
Why is it taking so long for the U.S. to get back to the moon?
So it's primarily political will, actually. So it's really expensive, and it takes a whole lot of continued interest and support.
Inside the capsule this time will be 3 Americans and a Canadian. During their 10-day mission, they'll be testing every critical system needed to eventually put boots back on the lunar surface.
I'm the commander for the Artemis 2 mission to the moon.
To the moon.
To the moon. To the moon.
This time around, the astronauts are only circling the moon, going deeper into space than any human has before. More than 400,000 kilometers from Earth. And while this mission will pave the way for a future lunar landing, the ultimate goal is to learn how to use the moon as a launching pad to much bigger ambitions, to eventually go to other planets like Mars, the next frontier in space exploration and competition. Ahead of the Artemis 2 launch, NASA unveiled an ambitious $20 billion plan to build a permanent base on the moon. China and Russia are chasing the same goal. Who succeeds will largely depend on who can access the moon's large deposits of ice, an estimated 600 billion kilograms found in the permanently shadowed North and South poles. China first retrieved samples in 2020 and says it's developed a novel way to convert lunar soil into large quantities of water.
Water has a number of different uses beyond just being able to drink it. It's a very good radiation shield. And of course, so you can split that water using sunlight into fuel. So you can basically decompose it into hydrogen and oxygen. That's rocket fuel.
The ability to refuel a rocket on the moon essentially transforms it into a petrol station, drastically reducing launch costs and enabling more ambitious deep space missions.
There's a lot of economic potential both on the moon and Mars. You can mine minerals on each of those places. Each will probably end up being major tourist sites, maybe more for the ultra-wealthy than for average people.
The World Economic Forum expects the space economy to be worth $1.8 trillion by 2035, driven by satellite launches and nascent space mining. That kind of money has piqued the interest of the private sector, led by companies like Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin and Elon Musk's SpaceX.
I mean, the private space companies have dramatically cut launch costs because we now have reusable rockets, which we did not have before. So there's a lot of innovation that has come out of the private companies. But then private companies sometimes cut corners. So the $64,000 question is, can you actually spend less money but still achieve the objectives that you have? We don't really know the answer to that.
The risks are high, but so too are the stakes. NASA aims to land astronauts near the lunar South Pole by 2028. China is targeting a crewed landing by 2030, leaving little room for delays in the modern-day race for space superiority. For CNA, I'm Tony Waterman in Washington, D.C.
Now, China's space ambitions are driving its push to fund reusable launch technology, seen as essential to keeping Beijing's efforts affordable and sustainable. Among contenders are CAS Space, a commercial spin-off of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, China's largest state research body. The firm is seeking to raise some $600 million in a planned listing on Shanghai's tech-focused Star Market. The stock exchange has eased listing rules for companies developing reusable tech as part of China's broader push to close the gap in space capabilities with America. CAS Space says it plans to use the proceeds to develop reusable rockets, a capability that, for now, has only been proven at scale at SpaceX. On Monday, CAS Space's non-reusable rocket succeeded in putting multiple satellites as well as a prototype spacecraft into orbit. The company says the current launch costs, while comparable to that of SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9, could be halved with recoverable tech. Finally, a clear sign of spring typically associated with Japan, now also becoming a spectacle in China. Cherry blossom season has arrived. In Beijing, the city is teaming up with mobile apps to guide visitors to the best viewing spots while sharing the history behind what's known as pink snow. Nearly 3,000 trees, many donated since the 70s, are on display here at Yuyuantan Park, home to one of the city's largest cherry blossom collections. These blooms are set to last through the end of the month. In Shanghai, the blooms across the financial hub have attracted plenty of selfies. They're only expected to last for a couple of weeks. Cherry blossoms were first cultivated in China as royal treasures as far back as the Han Dynasty. In ancient China, it was the plum blossoms in winter that took the limelight among the elite. It was also the case for ancient Japan, where aristocrats looked to China for cultural cues. But centuries later, Japan began defining its own cultural identity, and the native wild-growing cherry blossom, or sakura, eclipsed the imported plum blossoms. Cherry blossom watching is gaining favor in China, where some local officials are even using them to boost tourism and local consumption. And that's where we leave it for Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime, CNA.Asia. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. Bye-bye.